Hi, I want to make a video about this. This one will be brief. Honestly, I know I say that, and then my videos go long. Um, I'm trying to do some reading about the Roswell ship because I really don't have a. I don't feel like I have a complete understanding of it. I know that Phil Corso Jr. built it, and I went to go see him in Florida in 2011. But I ended up meeting his son Andrew Corso, and I was on the phone earlier today with Louis Michael Reinhardt. He puts together the Mars conferences. I called him, wanted to talk to him about Andrew Basiago. Louis Michael Reinhardt talks to Andrew Basiago quite frequently. I haven't had contact with Andrew in a long time. I send him emails, but he doesn't reply back. I was telling Michael Reinhardt, that when I was in a hotel in Fort Lauderdale before I went up to Fort Pierce, which is next to Port St. Lucie, where they used to have their airport. I mean, their hangar, their business high-speed composites was in a hangar at the Port St. Lucie airport, and it's closed now. Phil Corso no longer has a business, and his sons are working for different aerospace companies. I was in this hotel room, and I had an HP laptop, and I was working on it. I don't know what I was looking at, but the top was open and I could see the screen. And suddenly this little tiny ant appeared and started running across the top of the computer. So they teleported an ant on top of my computer. I think it was a real ant. I didn't squish it or anything. I was going. I was trying to blow it to get off of the computer. I forget what happened to it. I think I may have blown it off, but I don't remember. There weren't any ants in the room, so I know they had teleported that ant there. Several years earlier, I had a dream when I was living in Rockland, California. I was renting a room at 1008 Sammy Way. I had read an article in Marilyn Savant, who has, I think, one of the world's highest IQs. It's pretty high. It's up there with like Christopher Langan and gosh, I can't remember this guy's last name. Evangelos. He's a psychiatrist from Greece, and then Rick Rosner. They all have high IQs, and I know them. So Marilyn wrote that the 1008 is on a digital clock. That's the most number of the segments, little segments that make up the time, that show the numbers, that display the numbers on a digital clock. That's the maximum number of lights that you can have lit and still show a time, without to still have numbers that make sense. That's the maximum number of lights that you can have. And I didn't know that when I moved in. I just went in there because it was a pretty nice view. And that's the one that the manager showed me. It was the first one she showed me. So I had this dream. Well, one day, okay, these are two separate occasions. One day, I went in to take a nap, and I fell asleep, and I had this dream where I was sinking into a hole, and I just kept falling and just sinking into this darkness, and then suddenly there was an explosion. It sounded like an explosion in my ears, and then it felt like, at the same time, it felt as if someone had punched me in the chest, right in the chest, and I woke up. I realized my heart had stopped. I don't know why it stopped, but when it restarted, when it started pumping again, it made a really loud noise in my ears. I don't. That's never happened since. That happened that one time. I don't know why that happened. I thought maybe it had something to do with like eating too much salt or something, but I don't think that was what it is. I don't know what the problem was. And then there was a time when I had a dream. I think I had the dream of the big ant first, and this was several years before I ever went out to to Florida. So I was dreaming, and there was an ant, a big ant, just like it was huge. It stood about 3 to 4 feet tall, and I lived on the second story of an apartment building, and there was an exterior staircase to get up to the front door. And this ant had walked up the stairs and then over to my door, and the door was open. I was viewing it from inside the apartment, and the ant was just standing there with its mandibles opening and closing. I never came in the door. So that's as much as I can remember of that. I don't think there was anything else to it. And then there was, shortly after that, one more morning, in the morning, I was waking up. I was sleeping, I had my eyes closed, and I could visualize this diffused blue light, and I saw it kind of like on the wall, or not on the wall, I couldn't see the wall, I just saw this blue diffused light. And when I opened my eyes, where the blue diffused light had been was a very small ant, and it was standing on the door frame. There's this molding that goes around the doorway entrance, and that's what it was. It was just sitting there. So I thought, okay, it must be some connection between, that big ant and that small ant. I was getting phone calls for a while. I had to disconnect my phone. It would cause me to, one time the phone rang, and it was just a quick ring, and it caused me to wake up, and I had this vision. I think I got programmed through the computer screen somehow with the subliminal, but I don't know how they triggered it with the sound of the phone ringing, the telephone ringing, and it caused me to wake up. And it said, there was words that appeared. It said the sound, or what did it say? It said something like the sound and the glory is astounding, or something like that. The vision and the something astounding, and it was this horrible picture. It was a very grotesque vision of people that looked like they'd been in war, and that was triggered when I heard this sound. So I didn't plug the phone after that because I didn't want those people calling me anymore. And then there was one time I had a black helicopter come by and flew, and he was hovering off in the distance. I went out and stood on the balcony, and I was looking at him, and then he flew up and he flew up to where I could see him. I could see the pilot. He was showing me who he was, and I couldn't see very detailed stuff, but I could see him. He wanted to show me that there was a person inside there. I don't know what they were doing off in the distance hovering, but he let me see that there was someone in there. And that was the only time I had a black helicopter come by. I used to live, the residence where I lived in Rockland was kind of close to Beale Air Force Base, where they have the U-2 biplanes. I never went up there to look. I don't know if they have tours or something, but that was Rockland. And then I moved out of Rockland. I went down to, when I was living in Rockland is when I was communicating. I was reading online, and I discovered Clifford Stone. I forget what I was reading. I think it may have been, what was that, AT, Top Secret or something, that website. I can't remember what the name of it is. Maybe it had been that one, and then people were talking about Clifford, and he was posting a lot of detailed information. I knew that he had been. I got a sense that he had been involved in some stuff, but he wasn't giving out a lot of information. And then there was some offer to get information from him and some other guy had some organization called Spunk. I don't remember exactly what it was. When I talked to Clifford on the phone, then I found out where he worked. He was working at Roswell Job Corps, and I called there, and he spoke with me. He's retired now, but I used to call there, and I called him over the course of a year, and he said, if you're ever in town, come by the house. And I had a situation where I just had to get out of the apartment I was living in. It was horrible. It was a really nice place when I moved in. It was a brand new apartment complex, and but over a period of like 8 years, it just went downhill. And there was all kind of people drinking and using drugs and stealing stuff off of people's porches, and there was always a police car in the parking lot. I just got sick of it, so this is a long story. I ended up leaving. I took everything I owned and threw it in a dumpster and called a taxi and went to a hotel. And all I had was a suitcase. And I ended up going down to Sacramento one day, bought an Amtrak ticket, and went down to Roswell. At first, I went down. First, you go to Albuquerque. Then in Albuquerque, you get I guess it's a Greyhound bus, and you go to Roswell. And I got to Roswell. I had to walk, I don't know how many miles, from the bus station to center of town, and I found this motel. It was across the street from the Sallyport Inn, and that's where Lieutenant Colonel Philip James Corso stayed in 1997 when they had the 50th anniversary. And then Paula Harris, I remember reading, she had the room next to him, and she did an interview with him. Later on, I had got an email. I emailed Paula. Paula had written one of Clifford Stone's books, and so I emailed her. I was looking for somebody to read about. I had no idea about anything about the Corsos, and Paula told me to read about Lieutenant Colonel Philip James Corso. So I read about him and watched videos with him talking, and then I went to, I think it's Open Minds, and downloaded this. He wrote a paper called something. I can't remember. Open Minds. There's a website called Open Minds. It's information about UFOs, and they have a document there you can download that Phil Corso Sr. wrote. And then went down to Roswell. I was in Roswell. That was then when I communicated with Paula. Found about Phil Corso Sr. I went back to California. I had to go see a doctor. And I had been calling and telling this doctor there was moon bases, and she just ignored me, totally ignored all the information I was giving her. It was really frustrating. And she told me on the phone that if you come back to California, I'll do whatever I can to help you. And then after I got back to California, and it was actually in her office, her name is Mary Pat Pauley. She works for Sacramento Kaiser Permanente. She told me to go to a homeless shelter, and I was really angry, and I didn't do anything or say anything, but I was furious. I just got my suitcase and left. I never went back to her again, ever. She was close friends with Dr. Nancy Asher, or not very close friends, but Dr. Nancy Asher was at the time the head of the transplant division of the San Francisco UCSF Medical Center.